Welcome back to the Paid Media Intelligence series. I'm Erica. Today, we're covering something that most brands get wrong before a single ad is ever launched: budget architecture. How you actually build a media budget from first principles, defend it under pressure, and know when it needs to change. Let's start with what the wrong approach looks like.
The most common budget setting process I see is working forward from available cash. The finance team says, here's what we have. The marketing team divides it across channels based on last year's allocation, and that becomes the budget. And the problem with that process is it starts from the wrong question entirely. Available cash is a finance question. How much does a unit of growth cost, and how many units do we want to buy? That's the strategy question.
And those two questions produce very different budgets.
Completely different. The framework I always start with is working backwards from the revenue goal. If a brand needs $5 million in revenue from paid channels, at a blended marketing efficiency ratio of 4:1, the implied total paid budget is $1.25 million. That's the anchor. Then you build the channel allocation within that number, based on which channels have demonstrated the ability to generate the required return.
And that marketing efficiency ratio, MER versus ROAS distinction, matters enormously here, because ROAS is what the platforms report, and MER is what the business actually earned.
This is one of the most important distinctions in all of paid media. ROAS is calculated by the platform using the platform's attribution model with the platform's definition of what counts as a conversion. Google calculates its own ROAS. Meta calculates its own ROAS. And each of them claims credit using logic that benefits their own numbers. When you add Google's claimed ROAS and Meta's claimed ROAS together, you will often get a number that exceeds your actual total revenue, the same sale counted twice.
So the platforms are collectively claiming more credit than the business actually generated.
Consistently, MER fixes this. Total revenue from the business divided by total ad spend across all channels. No attribution model, no platform logic, just the actual revenue number divided by the actual spend number. If your MER is 3:1, but your blended in-platform ROAS is 7:1, you have a gap worth investigating. That gap tells you either that a lot of what the platforms are claiming would have happened anyway, or that your attribution is broken, or both.
And most founders have never run that comparison. They've seen their Google ROAS and their Meta ROAS and assume the business is performing at some blended version of those numbers.
When they do run it for the first time, the gap is often alarming. I've walked through this with a fashion brand that was proud of a blended in-platform ROAS of around 7:1. Their actual MER was closer to 2.8. The platforms were collectively claiming more than twice the credit the business was actually generating. That's not a small discrepancy. That's a fundamentally different picture of commercial performance.
So once you have the MER anchor and the revenue backward framework, how do you actually build the channel allocation?
You build a bottom-up channel model. Every channel gets three things assigned to it: a spend range, an expected return range, and a confidence level. High confidence means proven channels with historical data. Low confidence means new channels being tested. And that confidence level drives the budget logic.
Meaning proven channels get scaled and testing channels get capped.
Exactly. Proven channels get budget scaled toward the efficient frontier of their performance. Testing channels get a capped allocation sized for learning, not volume. And the testing budget is non-negotiable. I always hold 10 to 15% of total budget for net new tests, new channels, new creative formats, new audience approaches.
And without that reserve, you end up with what you've called channel atrophy.
Channel atrophy is a slow death. Your proven channels gradually become less effective, and you have nothing emerging to replace them because you never allocated budget to developing alternatives. Every brand I've worked with that hit a paid media wall had spent years optimizing existing channels without testing new ones. The brands with genuine channel resilience have been running small, persistent tests during the periods when core channels were performing well.
So the testing reserve isn't about finding something better. It's about not being caught completely unprepared when what's working stops working.
Exactly. And rebuilding from scratch in a moment of crisis is enormously more expensive than systematic testing when things are going well.
What about seasonality? Because I think flat monthly budget allocation is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes in paid media.
E-commerce is deeply seasonal. Most businesses have months that are 50 to 60% below average and months that are 150 to 200% above it. Your media budget should reflect that distribution, not fight against it. Front-load spend in high-intent windows before peak periods to build audiences and retargeting pools before CPMs spike. Pull back meaningfully during structural dead zones when conversion intent is low regardless of execution quality.
In Q4 specifically, the CPM spike catches brands unprepared every single year.
Every year, CPMs during peak season consistently surprise to the upside. The brand that commits its full Q4 budget in September runs out of money exactly when purchase intent is highest. I always hold 15 to 20% of Q4 budget as a flex reserve, specifically because peak season CPMs are unpredictable. You want ammunition when the market is hottest, not an empty account.
What are the structural guardrails that should be built into any media budget, regardless of size or channel mix?
3 that I consider non-negotiable. First, never let a single channel exceed 60% of total paid budget. Concentration risk in paid media is real. If Meta has an outage, an algorithm change, a policy update, and 70% of your budget is there, you have a business problem, not a marketing problem.
And that dependency is more fragile than most founders realize until it breaks.
Second, set minimum spend thresholds per channel and enforce them. $5,000 to $10,000 a month minimum for any channel in the plan. Below that, you don't have enough data to make meaningful decisions, the algorithm can't learn properly, and the management attention cost isn't justified by the potential contribution.
Either commit enough to learn or don't run the channel at all.
Third, build a kill switch threshold into every channel plan. If your cost per acquisition exceeds your target by more than a defined percentage, say 30% over target for more than 5 consecutive days, the protocol is to pause and investigate before adding any more budget. Not reduce budget. Stop, diagnose, then decide deliberately.
And the machine learning reset point is something I don't think gets enough attention, because cutting budget mid-flight isn't just reducing spend.
It's one of the most expensive and most common mistakes in paid media. When you cut a Meta or Google campaign budget dramatically mid-flight, you're not just reducing spend, you're sending the algorithm back to the learning phase. And during that recalibration, performance almost always gets worse before it stabilizes. The founder sees a bad week, cuts the budget 40%, performance degrades further, and they assume the channel is broken. The channel isn't broken. They broke it by reacting.
So the discipline is to build the guardrails in advance, in the calm moments, rather than making reactive decisions under pressure.
The kill switch threshold, the concentration limits, the minimum spend floors, the seasonality flex reserve, these are all decisions you make when you're thinking clearly and commit to as operating rules. The brands that make consistently good paid media decisions have taken the reactive human instinct to cut things when they're scared and replaced it with predefined protocols. Not because they're rigidly systematic, but because they know from experience what bad reactive decisions cost.
That's episode 10 of the Paid Media Intelligence series on Ecom Expedition with Asim. Budget architecture and the operating discipline that separates brands that consistently grow their paid media efficiency from those that perpetually chase last week's numbers. If you want to build this framework for your specific business, go to ecomexpedition.com to book a strategy session. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and we'll see you there.